So today's guest is Matt Haycox. Matt's story is one of the mistaker turned highly successful entrepreneur from starting his business, at the age of 16 and then got bankrupt by 28. He's a funding guru who has lent over $500 million of funding into SME businesses in UK and Europe. His strength as an investor in his knowledge and experience is in different industries, especially like finance, retail, leisure, and property. He have raised hundreds and thousands of pounds for Matt Haycox Foundation, starred on national TV, and became a special media star as well. He have used his knowledge and experience not only to help other people, not only to inspire other people, but also lending money to them and giving this helping hand so like those people can start their businesses as well. Please welcome Matt Haycox. Hey Matt.
Hey Jay, RJ, how you doing, buddy? Thanks for having me.
I'm great. Thank you so much. How are you doing? How's everything going for you today?
Good, mate. Very good. Thank you. Very good.
Awesome. Truly appreciate it. So like your story is really inspiring, from starting on at the age of 16 and then going bankrupt at the age, at the age of 28. So like walk us through a little bit of your brief backstory, like how the journey started from you and like how you got into the lowest point and got back to the highest moment as well. So can you like walk us through a bit of it?
Well, look, I mean, there's probably 20 hours of story there to condense into a few minutes. But I mean, look, if we start at the very beginning, I knew I wanted to be in business. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur from as early as I can remember, 9, 10, 11 years old. And I spent my teenage years, reading every book. And when I say every book, we've got to put this into context. I'm talking about 1990, 1991, 92 here, when I was kind of starting my learning journey. So there was no internet, there was no social media, there was, there was some books out there for sure, but there was not even 1% of the content that people have access to today. But, so I spent my younger years reading books on Alan Sugar and Donald Trump and Bill Gates, Richard Branson. There wasn't much else to read.
Yep.
And I spent my teenage years trying to do anything I could to make money, buying and selling at the market, buying a domain name to try and sell it for more money. But I started properly in business at 18. I guess that's when I worked in a real company. It was a failing company. It was a family business, and I spent 3 years being exposed to every possible problem you could imagine. Customers who didn't want to buy from us, suppliers who didn't want to supply us, banks who wouldn't lend money to us, staff who didn't want to work there. So I had every conceivable problem imaginable. I left there after 3 years. I'd learned a lot. I mean, if you'd have asked me back then, I would have said I've learned everything, but I learned pretty quickly that I didn't learn everything, but I did learn a lot. And then I moved into leisure because I guess what I knew about the uniform business, that's what this business was it wasn't really where my heart lied. It was a great learning ground, but I didn't want to spend my career buying and selling trousers and white shirts for security guards. So I opened a bar. Again, I didn't really know anything about running bars, but I was, 21, 22 years old, and I thought I could, sell beer, meet girls, and make money all at the same time. And that was really the start of my proper, let's say, money making time. I mean, up until that point, I'd learned a lot. I'd made a little bit of money, but I was certainly not rich by anybody's standards. But over the next, I opened a strip club. That was my first very successful leisure business. And basically, from 2004 to 2008, things went pretty wild for me. The strip club was very successful from day one. I then used that business as leverage to learn how to borrow money, to open a second club and a third club and a fourth club. And over the course of about 4 years, I became the biggest strip club operator in the UK. Had 11 venues. I probably had 65 pubs. I had restaurants, shops, hotels, property portfolio. I mean, I had everything. A big eight-figure business. I was making a lot of money. I was spending a lot of money. I was living a great life. But I was completely over leveraged. Something that's very easy to see now, not so easy to see at the time. When the credit crunch started to kick in June, July of 2008, everything came tumbling down for me, and literally in the space of 8-10 weeks, I went from, what was appearing to be a very successful, very clean, very large business to losing everything. And when I say everything, there was no business whatsoever left. None of the businesses, every asset had been taken from me, and I kind of woke up in September 2008, having gone to bed the night before as an 8-figure business owner, and waking up the next morning as a bankrupt with no business, a wife, and a 1-year-old daughter, and that was really the beginning of the next chapter of my entrepreneurial life.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Like, especially, I'm really curious to ask about like how you felt at the moment when, again, as you mentioned, you were kind of like on the top of the food chain, and then you got into the part of the on the verge or the bankruptcy itself. Like, how was it challenging for you? Because I feel like a lot of people out there try and things like that don't work for them, and then somehow they quit. So like, what was actually going inside of you, on the emotional side, and what was the motivation just to get back to the track?
I mean, listen, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, you've got to accept that failure is
Yep.
part of the territory. Now, look, I get it. There's degrees of failure, and obviously bankruptcy is about as far down that as you can go. But if you want to be in any field, there's going to be risks. There's going to be bad days. If you want to be a professional footballer, you might break your leg, you might break your ankle. That could put you out of the game for a while. But
Exactly.
it doesn't have to be the end of your career. And I think I always say that I don't really have a special tactic for people of how I came back from bankruptcy. For me, it was just very simple. I had no choice. I could have sat at home, and I could have watched crap TV, and and cried in my breakfast about how the world is so bad to me and that everything's gone wrong. But that wasn't going to feed my 1-year-old. That wasn't going to pay the mortgage or give me the life that I'd always wanted. So for me, it was really just I had no choice but going out there the next day and getting back to work again. I think look, I've always been a strong character. I've always had a lot of belief in myself, which I think is very important. I don't have. I don't have an ego. I mean, I'm sure some people would say I do, but like what I mean is, I'm as happy in a Ferrari as I am taking the bus. Like that just doesn't really bother me because I know that ultimately, my strength kind of comes from
Yeah.
me as opposed to the assets that I've got. I think as well what's important to know is people always talk about my bankruptcy time as a time of, oh my God, you lost everything. And I always say, I didn't lose everything. The only thing I lost was money. And that is actually the only thing
Yeah.
I lost. I didn't lose my contacts. I didn't lose my experience. I didn't lose my education. If anything, I gained a new education going through that bankruptcy experience. I lost my money. And I think and I know this is very easy for me to say as someone who's got money. And I know when you haven't got money feels like the most important and the most complicated thing in the world. But honestly, I think once you learn how to make some money, you realize making money is the easy bit, and that there's plenty of money out there. There's plenty of people willing to give you money for an opportunity, for an investment, to do some business with. What is difficult, well, not difficult, but what is time consuming and what people don't have is the knowledge, is the strength,
Yeah.
is the skill sets. They're the hard bits to get. Going and getting the money is actually not that difficult. So yes, okay, I would have obviously rather I didn't go bankrupt, but waking up for me was just almost like another day in the office. And okay, I'd taken a couple of steps backwards, but I just got to get out there and get back on the ladder. And I made my money second time around a lot quicker than I did the first time around, and which, again, anyone who's made money, whether they've made it or made it and lost it, will understand. There's always that expression that your first million is the most difficult, and that's
Yeah.
because when you're making that first million, you haven't got the skill set, you haven't got the contact base, you haven't got you just haven't done it before. But once you've done it, it's
Exactly.
like it's like a snowball. It's like anything. I don't know. It's like your first 10 press ups are probably the hardest, and then when you've been doing press ups for it, you can do 100 press ups more easy than the next guy can do 3 press ups, and it's just where do you focus your energy?
Yeah. Well, I really love the answer, especially how you mentioned is that when you went to bankruptcy, all you lose was money. That was the only thing that actually lost, and you had all the other things. So in your case, it was all about being resourceful rather than like finding like some sort of resources, stuff like that. You actually went and being more resourceful and figured out like, hey, how just can I continue my journey and go ahead and like just go back and get back to the track, right?
Absolutely. Like I say, I had responsibilities to my family. I had responsibilities to myself, and I just got to get back on with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I can so relate to it because, before starting the podcast, I was just telling you about it. Like I invested like $200, something like that, in order to forming the company. And then I had like no money. And instead of like crying, like, hey, I don't have any money, I cannot start a business. Instead, whatever I had, I just like gave it as an equity, and then just to raise any money, just to like, make it work or try to make it work. So I really love the point how you mentioned, around that. So the next question I really want to ask is like, why you think so? Like most people have this sort of like problems where they are always crying for like, hey, ending up in a victim mentality. Like, hey, we don't have this, we don't have that. That's why we cannot make it work. For example, for a lot of people who are living in like especially tier three countries, they have a lot of problems, and I understand personally. But like even like people who are living in like US, UK, or Canada, they are like, we cannot do it. So they're always like ending up in a victim mentality. What's your thoughts around of people like why they'll always end up in something like that, even though they know what they want, but they're just like not even starting about it? What do you think about it?
I think probably because it's easier to moan about it and easier to talk about it than to actually get on and do it. I mean, you can sit around on the couch with your friends complaining, easier than getting out there and putting some effort in and taking the risk. And I think that that applies to everything. I mean, look, we're talking about business, but
Yeah.
whatever, it's easier to talk about going to the gym than it is to go to the gym. It's easier to talk about reading a book than it is to read a book. I think ultimately people want to make excuses. They probably put unnecessary obstacles in front of themselves. I mean, it's interesting. You talk about like third world countries. I mean, my experience is that people coming from whether it's a third world country or whether it's someone immigrating into a first world country comes with a lot less of a victim mentality than the people in those first
Yeah.
world countries. And I think UK, America, wherever, we're spoilt, we're lazy, we're used to having everything done for us. Whereas when like someone like yourself, when you've got no money, you've got no choice but to try and make your life better and to try hard and to succeed. You know that making a better life for you and making a better life for your family rests on your shoulders and your shoulders alone. I think when you obviously it's a great thing that first world countries have that. I guess that infrastructure and that social security to make sure that people don't suffer poverty. But for
Yeah.
people who want to be lazy, it will make you more lazy because you think, well, I don't have to do anything today. I'll just go and sign on for my government check at the end of the month, and I can keep drinking beer and watching TV. So I mean, I don't listen. I'm not a scientist or a sociologist. I don't know the exact answer, but I think for me, like anything, it's easier to talk about doing something than to actually do it. And if you've
Yeah.
never tried, then you don't have to risk failing.
Yeah. Well, you exactly mentioned like right to the point out there, especially for the people who actually kind of like migrate from these tier three countries in countries like US, UK, Canada, stuff like that. They're even more hardworking, and compared to especially like for some people who are living in the country itself, but when they migrate, they work a lot harder compared to like a lot of other people. Speaking of it, I also know about
And I
like
think as
you
well,
help
sorry
other
to
people.
interrupt as well,
Yeah.
it's because you are, you're appreciative to the realities of what matters. I mean, like
Yeah.
in the UK or in the US or whatever, people sit around moaning about the most ridiculous bullshit. Whereas you come from India or Africa or some third world place. You arrive in America, you arrive in the UK. I mean, you've got running water, you've got a hot shower, you've got a roof, you've got got stuff, stuff to be appreciative for, that is worth working for, that you want to strive for
Yep.
more and more. Whereas people who've been born into it are just like I say, they take it for granted. They're lazy, and it's one thing trying to make a better life when you feel safe, but it's another thing trying to make a better life when you know that unless you work your arse off, there isn't even running water for your family.
Yeah, exactly. You hit right to the point. Also, as we were talking about that, you help a lot of other businesses out there, like lending them money so that they can either start or grow their businesses as well. So I'm curious to ask, like, how was the process look like for you? Was it kind of like something how sharks do, or like they invest in other people's company, or like what was the process look like for you, and what was kind of like the outcome you were actually looking for in order to help those
So,
businesses?
So look, I mean, there's all different kinds of ways that businesses can borrow money or take
Yeah.
investment, and there's different kind of ways that people can lend money or invest that money. My particular model, and it's not that mine's right and someone else is wrong. It's just my particular model is what we call secured debt. So it's always debt, not equity. So if I lend £100,000, for example, then I want £100,000 plus a fixed amount of interest back. And it's secured insofar as it's secured against a particular asset, typically property, but it could be plant or machinery or debtor book or other kinds of assets. But always something that I can take back if it all goes wrong. So I guess as a business owner, it's normally cheaper for you to take debt than it is to give away equity. I mean, like, yours is the most extreme example. I mean, you've given 35% of the business away for $200. I mean, one day
Yep.
that could be the best $200 somebody's ever possibly invested. I mean,
Well,
if you could have got
yeah,
debt for that, then you'd borrow $200 and you probably pay $250 back,
yeah,
and you've still got 100% of your business. So as a business owner, it's always cheaper to take debt, but it's not always easy to get debt because as someone who's giving that debt, we don't have a lot of upside. Our
exactly.
upside is what we get. If I lend 100 grand and you're giving me 120 back, then my upside is 20 grand. Your upside could be 20 million. Therefore, I need to make sure that if it all goes wrong, there's a way that I'm going to get my money back.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you mention about that exact same story, and that's the exact same thing happened with the people who are kind of like invested. They were kind of like me as a student, and they got like over 100x, like, or even more, like when they invested like 5 years ago. But the way that you mentioned about like the difference between investing into a business versus lending it is definitely kind of like clear. My follow-up question around that is how you see some people who actually took the money and made it work versus the people who might took it, but they never actually got the success with it. Obviously they took the money just because they had the desire for just to use it so that they can make their business work. But I'm sure you pretty much heard some cases that they might never be able to run their business profitably or successfully. Like what were the common denominator in cases like those, like why those businesses
Well,
actually failed?
So look, I mean, we always lend money normally for a positive business purpose. So
Mhm.
to be clear, we want to understand what the business plan is, what the story is, why somebody wants that money. But yeah, obviously, it doesn't always work out. I mean, if I had to pick one common reason, it's probably probably lack of knowledge, lack of education, lack of actually understanding. I mean, I always say that most business owners shouldn't be in business. They've gotten in there by accident, and they think that they're running a great business. You think that they're very clever, but they're probably 9 out of 10 are probably more lucky than they are
Yeah.
clever. But normally it comes down to arrogance, lack of education, not taking responsibility. Also, there's a lot of unrealism. I mean, it doesn't really matter what business model I look at. So many entrepreneurs overestimate the sales, underestimate the costs, underestimate the time it's going to take to get there. Don't put the required effort in, or spend too much. I mean, so many times I look at startup business plans where somebody says, "Oh, I want to start this business, whatever this business is, and we need £200,000. And I take a look at it now. I start looking at this. Hang on. So you've got £200,000 because you're renting an office for 30K. You've hired an assistant. You've spent 10 grand on a website. But and I look at this and I say, hang on a minute. I can put a line through 175K of your costs, and you can go and start this business
Exactly.
for 25K. Okay, fine. You can't be flexing on Instagram in your fancy office because you're working in your parents' bedroom. But what do you want? Do you want a real business, or do you want to flex on Instagram for 3 months?
Yeah, wow, that's so true. A lot of people feel like they have to have these like flashy things just to show like they're actually running the business or something like that, or even like pretend about it, like, hey, we are running this business, like cool and stuff like that. That's cool. Also, like you also have a podcast as well, and you
Mm.
have interviewed like some amazing people. Like tell us a little bit about like how you thought about like of you starting a podcast and what it's about for the people who don't know about it, and like how you plan it, how you plan to start about it. What was the backstory about it?
So I've had my podcast for about 4 years now. I mean, I think in terms of audio episodes, I'm on 200 and something, and I've also got a video version on YouTube as well.
Yep.
I started the podcast purely by accident. I mean, literally, there was no great plan, no great thought. I was just trying to create content online. I knew I needed to have some content to build my personal brand, and I always like anything that's, I guess, that's efficient. Or that can be repurposed. And at the time, we started to make videos for YouTube, and then I could strip the audio off and use the audio on iTunes or Spotify or whatever that may be. So it really just started with no plan, just to make some content. But then what I kind of learned afterwards was that having the podcast was giving me the chance to meet people that I wouldn't get to normally meet.
Exactly.
Because it would be people who would not want to, would not take my call, or would not have a meeting with me from a business perspective. But if I gave them the chance to come on a podcast, then all of a sudden that's a very different frame. It's a very different question. So it would allow me to meet people and build relationships. And secondly, it allowed me to meet people that I could ask questions and I wanted to have the answers to. And I always say that, I say everybody should have a podcast. And I always say
Yeah.
that I don't care if not
100%.
one person ever watches mine or ever listens to it, because the biggest benefit for me is the fact that I get to sit with the people that I want to make a relationship with and ask them the questions that I want to ask the question with. And literally, I had this conversation with a girl who works with me yesterday or the day before. She's working in marketing and working in some marketing with me. And I said to her, by the way, I said, if there's ever anyone that you want to try and talk to that you wouldn't get the chance to, like for example, we're working with Canva and we're working with Beehive and some of these things. I
Yeah.
said, if you ever want to, just reach out to the CEO or the CMO of these businesses and ask them to come on the podcast. And we can just use it totally selfishly, just so that we can sit down and we can ask the questions that we want to ask. And I mean, I do that kind of stuff all the time. I mean, I've started a newsletter 2 or 3 months ago, so I've been trying to learn as much as I can about newsletters, and I've found 3 or 4 guys who've got great newsletters out there, and I've reached out to them to say, hey, would you like to come on the podcast? They come on the podcast because obviously it benefits them to have a bit of exposure, to be introduced to a new audience. But I get to sit for an hour and ask questions, the direct questions that I want the answer to from absolute experts in the field. And honestly, for me, they're the 2 main benefits of a podcast. Obviously, number 3 is if everybody watches it, everybody listens to it, and we become the next Joe Rogan. Great, happy days. That happens to 1 in a million of us. But what we can all guarantee is that we can use it as an opportunity to meet great people and ask important questions.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you really nailed it, especially on the podcast side of it, especially for the people who are like watching or listening about it. You have to just like understand, like even nobody listens to you. The people you're having the conversation with, like by just having the podcast, is like immense. Like it's huge. You just have to understand that factor to it. Well, that's amazing. So I really wanted to ask, like, if, as you mentioned, you also started a newsletter a couple of months ago. Well, for the people who especially want to uh, be the part of your world and want to listen to your podcast, because I've listened some of them and those are amazing. So like if somebody want to listen to those podcasts or somebody want to be the part of those newsletter, how can they actually be the part of it?
So you'll find me online on social. I'm the Matt Haycox. That's TheMattHaycox. I'm the Matt Haycox on all things social. You can go to my website, which is matt-haycox.com, and between those two, you'll find everything. That'll lead you to my newsletter, to my web content, to my social content, and everything else. I'm very active, so and I always respond to messages or include questions in my content. So please, come find me, come follow me, and come reach out.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Matt, first of all, thank you so much for being on the show today out there. I will post up all of the links and resources in the show notes, also in the comment section down below, so the people can be the part of your world. Any last thing that you want to say before we round the show up?
No, just listen. From my personal perspective, come find me. And from your personal perspectives, we've talked about podcasts and the importance of having a podcast. And I think the second piece of advice from me would be picking up on RJ's story. That don't overvalue your equity if you need to get back in the game. Listen, obviously, I would probably argue that RJ gave away a huge amount of equity in that business.
I actually bought back some of them. It's
Really?
funny.
Okay,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
$200, but at the end of the day, he needed the money. He needed to get
Yeah.
back in the game, and he's got to do whatever it takes. So don't be greedy. Don't procrastinate. He could have sat around for the next 5 years trying to find someone to give him the money. But what's more important is to be able to keep playing the game. There'll always be a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance. So just make sure you do what it takes to keep playing.
Yeah, I truly appreciate you, man. Like, thank you so much for being on the show out there. It was amazing. It was so helpful. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we're definitely going to see you guys in the next episode next week. Until then, peace out.